Adoption and expensive. Two words that do not always belong together. There are 120,000 children in the United States that are waiting for a forever family, and adopting through this option is extremely affordable. I'm Marcy Bursack, an adoptive mom of a sibling pair, and also the author of The Forgotten Adoption Option. Twice monthly, I will interview people like adoptive parents and adopted children who have been touched by foster care adoption. My goal is to find more forever families and increase awareness about foster care adoption, because if it were you or me, we would want someone to do this for us. Welcome to the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast.
Today I'm going to interview an adoptive mom who adopted two children who were not biological siblings, and they were also her first two placements, which is pretty unusual. Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
Natalie and I met when we attended the same church. I was newly married and she was about to head off to college. She thinks that we met because we were sitting by each other at a women's self-defense workshop at church, but I thought we met because we were both in the women's restroom at the same time one night at church. Whatever it was, Natalie and I have been friends for quite some time. She's from St. Louis, but has lived in Texas for the past 6 years and taught first grade for 3 years before becoming a mom. So I'm really excited for her to share her story. And Natalie, I'd love to kick off with, why did you become a foster parent?
Sure. That's a great question. Honestly, it's a pretty simple answer. My husband and I felt like the need was really great in our area, and we had the resources to help. We had extra bedrooms in our house. We had plenty of food and a lot of love to give. And so for us, it just kind of felt like a no-brainer. I know that's kind of a simple answer, but
yeah, you were ready. So just a quick question on that one, Natalie. So some people may or may not know that when you do sign up to be a foster parent or adoptive parent, you have to have enough beds for the number of children you're planning to have, and they have to have separate bedrooms by gender. Did you all already have furnished bedrooms and everything?
we did. So when we bought our house, we had been saving to buy a house, knowing that as soon as we had our house, we would be able to start the whole process. And so, yeah, we had one room that we had fixed all up. We actually were planning for elementary age kids and older. And so, yeah, we had a nice little room set up all ready to go and kind of be able to switch it to be either for a boy or a girl.
Wow, you all did some serious planning. So that sounds like years ahead of time. So you're saving up to buy a house. Who was first to bring up getting involved with the foster care system? Was it you? Was it your husband? And how did you both get on the same page?
So ever since I was a little girl, I always wanted to adopt. I can remember joking with my parents saying I would be the person with like 10 kids driving around in our bus. And I guess I always just imagined that it would happen through international adoption because I'm part of the Christian church. It was always a really big thing. But after getting married, Chris and I learned more about foster care, and we just kind of never really looked back. And so I feel like we've been lucky that we were always kind of on the same page. We had talked about wanting to adopt before ever getting married. Neither of us ever really felt like a huge desire to have biological kids. We were always very impartial. You know, we would have been happy if it happened, but totally content if it didn't. And so for us, adoption was always plan A. And so, we were pretty much on the same page, but that is one thing when I talk to friends who are looking into foster care adoption, I always really stress the importance of partners being on the same page, because it's a really challenging journey and one that will either bring you closer than before or put a lot of strain on your marriage.
I'm like tearing up, Natalie. You're reminding me, because there's so much similarity that I share with you on adoption being my plan A and my husband's plan A as well. But I'm remembering this book. I don't know if you read this in your childhood, but it was Madeline, and it was 12 little girls in 2 straight lines. Do you remember that book?
I didn't read the book, but I saw like the show or the movie.
Yeah. And I don't know, they all were living together. So for me, somehow, like all of that kind of, I feel like, was in my childhood of like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have lots of people.
Yeah.
That's awesome that you and your husband were on the same page, even before marriage, that was a conversation you had.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just, we both really had the heart for it.
That's such a gift. So Natalie, you have been a teacher And one of the things that I've anecdotally heard from social workers in the foster care adoption community is that what they call, air quotes, helper professions, which are things like teachers and healthcare providers and people that are social workers, tend to be more prone to adopt children. Do you agree with that?
I've never heard that or connected that, but it makes a lot of sense. I think that's true. And when I think about my other friends who are foster parents or who have adopted, it's a lot of those same professions. So, maybe that really does hold true.
Why do you think that is? Because I'm married to a teacher as well. So it's just kind of ironic.
Yeah.
But why do you think it works that way?
I mean, just that heart for helping others. And I think in foster care, I've always said that I think being a foster parent or even an adoptive parent is one of the most selfless things, where like you're doing it for someone else and you really can't expect anything else in return because you really might not get it. And so, I don't know, just having that heart and that desire to just love others and serve others, I think it just goes hand in hand with foster care and adoption, because you're pouring yourself out for someone else over and over and over again. And I realize, you can do that with your biological children as well, sure. But, with foster care and adoption, I think there are added layers to that, and added hardships, I guess, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. It's interesting. You're right. The parallel of being in a profession where you're a giver and you're a helper. And so why not do that with your personal life as well? That makes sense.
Yeah.
So Natalie, you adopted two separate children who you fostered. What was it like knowing you were their temporary home that was aiming to help each child reunify with their biological family, and then all of a sudden shifting to becoming their adoptive family?
Yeah. So for our daughter, she was our first placement, and she was only 5 years old, and she stayed with us for about 2 months. And I remember feeling very optimistic for her and that she would be able to return to family. And I really wanted that for her and for them. Of course, there would be days where I would let my mind wander into the what ifs, but I knew the goal was reunification. And she was eventually reunified, but then would return later. And our son came straight from the hospital at 5 days old. And we were told that he would be going to a family placement within the next 2 weeks. So I tried very, very hard to not let myself get into the what ifs. But man, it is so hard. Like, this was the hardest thing for me as a foster parent. I felt like with my son, since he was a newborn, that the attachment came very naturally and quickly as I was providing for, his every need. I had taken 7 weeks off work, and it was just a lot of time, just the two of us. And so as time went on and placements kept falling through, it became harder and harder to not imagine him as part of our forever family. And so this is that very weird line that I talk about a lot in foster care, is that the goal is reunification and you cheer on the family and you hope that it works out, but it's impossible to not also play through what if scenarios in your head. And it's a hard line to walk, and it comes with a lot of emotions. And I think that was one of the hardest things about being a foster parent.
Really walking that delicate line. Natalie,
Yeah.
You bring up a really incredible point of what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you can dig back in your memory, because your daughter was a little bit older and it sounds like she got reunified while your son came to live with you.
Yes.
Sequence.
Yeah. So she was reunified, and then we had actually taken in a teenager who lived with us for a few months. She wasn't in foster care. And then she left, and then a month later, our son was born. So he was 6 months old when our daughter came back.
So you were just parenting whoever was in your care. And I wonder, you mentioned what ifs, and I'm sure with each child, those what ifs were different. Can you, just for people that maybe have no idea and are thinking that sounds really scary already, or what do you wonder about? Can you just shed some light on some things that were going through your mind as a what if scenario?
Sure. This isn't necessarily a what if, but I'm going to come back to it. But I can remember one of the hardest things for me is I had several friends who had just had babies around the same time my son was born. And I remember struggling a lot with jealousy. Like I would go to church and I would see them with their babies and I would leave thinking like, man, it must be so nice to know that one day someone's not going to just come show up and take your baby. And like, I mean, I felt that so much. And those what ifs of like, what if tomorrow is the day that they text and say, we found, a placement and we're going to move him. Also, we had gotten to the very end where rights had been terminated, and we had gotten to where we were having visits with the adoption CPS worker, and everyone's like, oh, this is the easy part. You just like flow on through until the end. And then we were told that there was potentially another family who would have rights to him over us because they had a sibling. And so imagine hearing that when you're like a month away from adopting and you've gone through this treacherous year of like waiting and what ifs and things like that. So yeah, what if they come and take him? What if he gets, goes back and like isn't taken care of the way that we hope? And so many things are just completely out of your control, and so many things are frustrating with CPS, and it's kind of a constant loop in your head.
Wow. Yeah. There's just because there's no guarantee. There's no promise of anything. And there's so many possibilities.
Right. And you can't be angry about it because that is foster care, and like reunification is the goal. And so then there's like, it's just that line of then feeling guilty that you feel like that because that I knew he wasn't ours, and so it's hard.
Yeah, such a delicate boundary. And I just want to make sure our listeners, because we have people all over the country, in some places, so Natalie's in Texas, CPS is Child Protective Services. I'm in Missouri, and we have the Division of Children and Family Services. So it kind of all goes after different names, depending upon where you live. But that's the division of the government that handles foster care and all of this process. And you're right, Natalie, like there's a lot of unknowns and you can't be mad about it. But at the same time, it's almost, I know for me, like I would kind of get to an okay spot of like, okay, I can be okay with this. And then something would happen that would totally tip the boat where, like you mentioned, there was another potential adoptive home. And so it just kind of, you thought you had a plan and your plan might not happen. And so
yeah,
it requires a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Natalie, your daughter, you mentioned she was 5 when you met, right?
Correct.
And then the first time you helped her reunify, and then when she came back, you ended up adopting her. What was the conversation like with your husband when you were talking about becoming her forever family?
Yeah. So when we were contacted by CPS for our daughter to return and be adopted, it was a little bit of a whirlwind. Our son was 6 months old at the time and still in foster care. We had just had a serious car accident a few days prior, and I had broken 3 major bones in my dominant hand. I was looking at 2 surgeries and would later find out I'd have to quit my job. It was very, very emotional on top of getting a call for her to return to our house. There wasn't honestly really a lot of conversation. My husband called me while I was at work and said, they're looking for an adoptive home. And he's like, I already told them yes. And, for us, we just went into foster care knowing that if we had children in our home who became adoptable, that we would adopt them. And so that happened to be our first 2 placements, which isn't always the case, but we loved her and we knew that we were the only other family she'd been a part of besides her biological family. And so it just made sense.
I love how confident he was. Like he knew because you guys had already talked about it. And so he was more calling to give you the update
right.
instead of getting your permission. That's such a great partnership.
Yeah. And he did the same thing for our son because we had said we were not that we only wanted, but we were really taking children 5 and up. And then they called and said, we have a 2-day-old baby. And he said yes before calling me. But then I was pumped. So it was fine.
It's like he knew it was better for you. Like we talked about this, but I'm going to go with my gut.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy is we had talked about it, not even kidding, the night before we had gone to a football game and 2 of my friends had little ones. And I have a picture on my Instagram saying like trying to talk him into doing babies through foster care. And then the next day we got a call for our son.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's wild.
And it's funny because you have a timestamp, like you have proof.
Yeah. Very, very crazy.
So amazing. So Natalie, something I know you're really passionate about, and we had talked in preparation for our recording about some pieces about adoption, and you mentioned that there can sometimes be like a massive savior complex, especially among people who identify as Christians, that they can feel like they're the savior in adopting these children. Can you say more about what a savior complex is and your views on it?
Yeah, so let me clarify. I think that anyone can have a savior complex, not just Christians. This was just the realm I was in and where I saw it the most. So when I say savior complex, I just mean that sometimes we can feel as if we're saving the children who come into our homes. So the idea that we as the foster home is what's best for the child is not, in my opinion, what's healthiest in a system that's main goal is reunification. So hear me that there are definitely situations where a child is being severely neglected and abused. And obviously there are cases where, we are providing a safe place, and that is wonderful and great. But I think we have to be really careful to not always feel like we are what's best. Just because we're middle, upper class, we have jobs, we're well educated, doesn't make us better than biological families. I've seen so many times where people use these excuses to fight and say that a child is better off with them, even after a parent has worked their reunification plan given by the state. And I think all of us as foster and adoptive parents have to really look within ourselves and make sure that we are being child-centered and not parent-centered. I think we have to listen to other adoptees and their experiences to learn and grow and give the best to our children. And I'm included in this. The line I talked about before, wanting reunification, but also selfishly seeing the child as yours forever is hard. But I think with intentionality and checking our motives and not thinking that we are automatically what's best for our kids can help us to not live with this savior complex.
And I love your words about being child-centered and not parent-centered, because I know it's kind of a parallel topic to this, and maybe you've been told the same. I've had people say, "Oh my goodness, you adopted your kids through foster care. You're a saint." And I'm
Right.
like, "What?" Or like, "Wow, you're such a hero." And I'm like, "What?" Like, my kids are the brave ones. I didn't do
Yeah.
anything. Like, I just opened up my home. Like,
Right.
so it's just an interesting perception that we can both project on the children we're raising and that the world can kind of project on us.
Sure. Yeah.
So interesting. Natalie, are you and your husband still a licensed foster home?
Sadly, we are not. We have a 3-bedroom house, so all of our bedrooms are full. In Texas, you can take a year off once you've adopted your kids and, not do any of the trainings or keep up with the things. So we took that year off, but we weren't really planning after that to move houses. And, we just felt at that time that building attachment and getting our kids, the therapies and things that they needed, what really needed to be our first priority at that point. And so my husband and I really plan and hope to foster again when our children are older. We have stayed involved in foster care in a lot of ways, babysitting for friends, or we have several organizations that we like to volunteer at or help with here in Houston. I have met with lots of friends over coffee to talk about foster care and answer their questions. So we feel it's still so important to have a hand in foster care. It just looks a little bit different, which is something I often tell people, is that there's so many ways to be involved without just opening your house.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, because and I love what you just mentioned about like meeting up with friends that have questions, because I think sometimes it's hard to find the information. And that's part of the motive of why I wrote the Forgotten Adoption Option, because I had so many people in my own home explaining the process that I'm like, they can't be the only people. And in fact, I can't have hundreds of people over to my home in a year, but I know people have these questions, and like, where do they find answers? And Nellie, I'm curious, because my own experience when we closed our license after we finalized the adoption with our kids, one thing I noticed was the kind of the cadence of things, because we no longer had to plan for social workers in our lives and visits and paperwork. Did you kind of have the same sort of I wouldn't say detox, but like digression of responsibilities? Do you remember that stage?
Yeah, I mean, I remember just loving it. I mean, our kids, we were fostering two at the same time. So they each had CASA workers and they each had, their own CPS worker and lawyers come and visit in Texas. And so our house was literally a revolving door. And so, it was nice to just be like, okay, we're done. And like, if we want to travel, it doesn't have to get approved by a judge. Like, it was just way less planning and just so much more authentic. And it was really good for us. We really needed it.
It was the right time, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And you brought up a really interesting role that I know a lot of people aren't aware of, a CASA, which is a court-appointed special advocate. And I actually have a former coworker, that was very much interested in helping children in foster care, but didn't know what she could do. And she has been at CASA for years. And essentially, you can speak to this too, Natalie, feel free to chime in, that she gets to know a kiddo who's in foster care and acts as their advocate. So it's sort of like this maybe aunt that you never had or uncle that you never had that gets to know your story and help advocate for you to have a healthy and stable life.
Yeah, our CASA workers, my favorite people ever. And I will say that my daughter's CASA worker, pre-COVID, still comes and does like monthly things with her. They have girls' dates. Like, she's amazing. And my son's is also amazing. She's a little older, but I called her a few months ago for like 35 minutes to just catch up. Like, they are, and that's all volunteer. I love them, and I'm forever grateful for the things that they did for our children.
They're like an extended family.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Natalie, this was a blast. And I love your heart and just how proactive you and your husband have been, but also how open to change you both have been. And I appreciate your vulnerability. So thanks for taking time to let us peek into your story, because I know that every foster care and foster care adoption story is so different. And just by sharing our stories, people can become more aware and we can help find some more forever families. So thank you, Natalie.
As a listener of the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast, you are helping raise awareness about foster care adoption and the 120,000 children who are waiting for a forever family. You can also help raise awareness by leaving a review, subscribing, sharing, talking about, and liking this podcast. If you'd like more information on adopting a child or sibling set through the foster care system, visit my website, ForgottenAdoptionOption.com. There you will find out how to get started, and you can even order a copy of my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option, which will guide you through the entire process, and it is available in paperback, audio, and ebook. I welcome you to reach out with questions, comments, and your own story. I would love to hear if you're signing up for training or where you are in the adoption process. You can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for Marcy Bursack. Thank you for tuning in, caring, and sharing, because every child deserves a family.